Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Fred Kowal. I'm president of United University Professions, and welcome to today's panel, UUP Moving Forward, Including All. This panel was put together, sponsored by UUP's Gender and Sexuality Interests Committee, a committee that does amazing work, bringing issues forward of interest to all of UUP's 40,000 members. You know, when we talk about a union, it's kind of passé to say, well, a union represents everyone. But generally speaking, throughout the history of unions, the focus of unions has really been on individuals' economic interests, sometimes solely economic interests of that distinct population. Things are changing. Things are changing for the better, because I think unions always, at least the ones that lasted and had a real impact on American society, were those that embraced the wide spectrum of social justice issues facing a society. Because if a union doesn't do that, if it is only focused on the narrow economic interests of the members of a union, that is a trip to oblivion. Unions won't survive if that is their only focus. And that is because eventually the pressures within a society, the pressures to change, will create a situation where unions will be considered irrelevant and unimportant to the greater struggles within a society. That's why I am proud of UUP's history. You know, we were born just about 50 years ago, and we were born in the middle of the surging movements for rights for African Americans, for Indigenous people, for women, gay rights, the environmental movement. All of these movements were hitting stride. And that's when UUP was born. And that's why UUP has always had a tradition, a history of being, as I like to say it, more than just a union. When we talk about the need for inclusivity in an organization like UUP, we're not just saying words. Efforts that we have undertaken in advocating for legislation, in being present within communities to assist them, to witness with them, to struggle with them, that is part of our history and will always remain so. One of our panelists today is with us from the American Federation of Teachers. And this history in UUP, this tradition, that is something we share with our national affiliate and its president, Randy Weingarten. The commitment of the AFT, of our state affiliate NYSET, of UUP, we will always be strong for the rights of all. Otherwise, as I have said, a union really becomes meaningless. Yes, we will achieve great economic gains. And if you want evidence of that, go to one of the campus events that's being scheduled right now. In fact, after we're done today, I'm on my way to Syracuse to Upstate Medical. And I know Carolyn Kube, who is on the panel with me, she's going to be there. We're going to be there to present to the members of UUP at Upstate the details of the recently signed tentative agreement. It has a lot in it, a lot of economic gains. But the focus this time around was really a social justice agenda to raise up those who are most economically disadvantaged, adjuncts, professionals at the lowest pay grades, contingent full-timers. Also, those who work at our SUNY hospitals and who have faced COVID now for 3 years, putting their lives on the line. And we've made tremendous gains. We also have established really historic achievements, like, for the first time, longevity pay that recognizes service to the university and service to our students and patients at 7 and 12-year increments. That's an historic gain. And that is something we're going to build on when we negotiate our next contract. That's the way it works. Just on adjuncts. Last time, for the first time in our history, we got minimum salaries per course into the contract. We'd fought for that for decades. We got it. This time, there's a 69% increase in the per course salaries for adjuncts by the end of this agreement for those who work at the Ag and Techs and at the comprehensives. A 60% increase for those who work at the university centers. Massive increases in the pay going to those who are residents and fellows at our medical institutions. That's just a couple of examples. There's a lot of money in this contract. And in fact, per year, it is the richest contract in decades that UUP has gotten. A lot of members stood together to get it, and that's why we succeeded. And in fact, that's what today is about too, standing together for justice, for what is right. We see every day in the news how the rights of so many people are under assault in this country. And it's a shame. It really is. I don't know where this is coming from. It's not the America that I was brought up to believe in as I grew up in the 60s and 70s, because we saw change happening and it was for the good. But really, we can see attacks on LGBTQ plus civil liberties that are on the rise, from banning books to banning drag shows. Extremists are targeting the rights of LGBTQ plus members of our communities. They are legislating discrimination. That's what they're doing. UUP's response has been to approve a resolution at our last delegate assembly, supporting legislation that is before the New York State Legislature that would ban non-essential state travel to states that have implemented laws that discriminate against those belonging to protected classes. And that's the core focus for today's panel discussion. We've got a great variety of folks who can speak to the importance of diversity, and especially to the rights and the importance of unity around the rights of the LGBTQ plus community. And so let me tell you a little bit about those who are joining us today for the panel. First, we have Carolyn Kube, who I mentioned earlier. She is our statewide vice president for professionals, and her home campus is Stony Brook, HSC. Carolyn has been active in UUP for more than 20 years, in fact, serving on a number of negotiations teams. She has served, starting out as a department rep, then as a statewide delegate, part-time concerns officer, a vice president for professionals before becoming Stony Brook HSC's chapter president, serving nearly 3 terms before taking on her present role. And she has enthusiastically and energetically taken on important work on diversity, equity, and inclusion that she's going to tell you about today. Also joining us is Kelly Keck, UUP's GSI committee chair. Beyond that, though, Kelly has been a strong and articulate advocate for the rights of everyone within UUP and our society. He serves as a UUP statewide executive board member and as the campus at Delhi's chapter president. Our third panelist speaking today is Maeve Kline, American Federation of Teachers Government Relations Office. In that role, Maeve covers federal legislation, specifically legislation that deals with the LGBTQIA plus community and the general areas of equality and justice. That's something, as I said, that is a focus for AFT, for all of us, and it's got to be something that we focus on in the union movement. In addition to working on other federal issues relating to climate, rural issues, community schools, and technology, she also leads student debt clinics as part of AFT's efforts to provide important student loan resources and information for our members. Prior to working at AFT, she earned her New York State teaching certification for elementary education. Lastly, and certainly not least, we have Chris Black, who is Director of Legislative and Political Affairs for UUP. Chris comes to us most recently from serving in the New York State Legislature on the staff of former Assembly member Peter Abate. Prior to that work, he served on the staff of the Speaker of the New York City Council, and also prior to that, a long time of service at New York State United Teachers, NYSUT, in their legislative department. In fact, as Director of Legislation for NYSUT. So high-powered panel for all of us to enjoy. And, I invite all of you listening today, if you have any questions, drop them into the chat. If there is time at the end of the presentations, and I hope there is, I will open it up for questions. If we run out of time, we're going to ask the panelists to help us and answering the questions as part of follow-up registrants. I was at another conference this past weekend, and one of the speakers, who was just dynamite, said, if there isn't follow-up, then nothing really happened. And so we will follow up. And I'm really pleased to see the numbers of UUP members who have joined us today. Thank you for taking the time for this important conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and union sibling, Carolyn Kube. Carolyn, take it away.
Thank you, Fred. Let me just get rid of this. Hello, all. I'm glad you're here today. As part of my responsibilities as a Vice President for Professionals is to spearhead UUP's multi-year DEI plan. The initial stage of the plan has been funded by the Workforce Development Institute, which is a state-funded affiliate of the AFL-CIO. And I just wanted to mention and acknowledge their generosity that has helped us get this plan off and running. DEI issues, as Fred has said so eloquently, interest and training are an important tenet to UUP and the labor movement at large. To build our capacity in this arena, UUP sought out a company that would provide more than a cookie cutter training for our members and staff. UUP wanted a program that would build capacity, that would translate to sustainable member action and participation in UUP's DEI work. Tangible Development created an interactive educational program to help us build that capacity, identify gaps and voids where we needed more training at the campuses and the chapters. The additional goal was also to develop training that employs the train the trainer model. The program consists of 14 two-hour sessions that began in January, and the final session is today at 3. I have to say it was a privilege to do this training, and I think I'm going to cry at the end because these 40 people we have connected in very intimate and close ways, and we've all grown. So it's going to be an emotional day. In these sessions, we have discussed topics such as structural racism, implicit bias, privilege, calling in, calling out, and how to be an ally, to name a few. Prior to these topic discussions, each session begins with a discussion of the current happenings that are related to DEI, such as the legislation in states, particularly Florida, around reproductive rights and LGBTQ+ rights, and the effects of these legislative measures on each of us, our union, and those in the affected communities. All other sessions have dealt with a SWOT analysis of our experiences with our campuses and our union around training initiatives and hiring practices. Today, our final session, we will flesh out the next steps, which will be as simple as creating a listserv for the 40 participants to stay engaged as we begin to roll out events and trainings, create an open topic monthly discussion space to delve deeper into the topics around DEI that are suggested by the membership at large, as well as giving our union members resources to connect with those members already doing DEI work on their campuses and chapters. And I have to say, this is a very exciting time for UUP. If you are interested and excited to find out more about the DEI work we will be doing, and that is being done by this group and at our chapters, and want to be a part of these plans, please feel free to reach out to me or Kelly. We will drop our emails into the chat. And I want to thank you for attending today's program, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Thank you, Carolyn. So my name is Keck, for those who don't know me, and I know Fred introduced me, but just to remind, to say it again, I am the chapter president from Delhi. I'm also the chair of the Gender and Sexuality Interest Committee and a member of the state e-board. I work at Delhi as the manager for our online education, and just a little shout out, if I can quote Fred and take personal privilege, a little shout out to the Delhi participants. I thank you for joining us and for the support. So I wanted to discuss the resolution that we passed at the last delegate assembly in the spring, but I also wanted to provide some context and history on how we got to that point. So last year so when I'm looking at the list of participants, there's a lot of people that whose names I haven't seen before, and that's exciting to me. So last summer we had a panel at the end of Pride Month, and we discussed the Don't Say Gay bills that were primarily at the time mostly in Florida and then quickly spread through to other states. And we had invited individuals from Upstate Medical, an individual from Delhi, an EOP counselor, and we discussed the potential impacts of such legislation on student learning, on the safety and health of teachers in school, and workload related issues. So we had a broader discussion about the impacts of such discriminatory legislation would have on those working or participating in the education system. So, and then we tried to have some time at the end to discuss next steps. So in the end, what next step we as a committee landed on was to suggest and propose a resolution that would ban, technically that would support the legislation, as Fred mentioned, before the legislature right now, that would ban all non-essential state travel to states that have engaged in some sort of discriminatory shenanigans, including states like Texas, Tennessee, Florida. There's a good number. Unfortunately, it's a larger number than I would like to see. So we drafted the resolution, and then we discussed it in our committee, and then we took it to the executive board. I am sharing, hopefully, if everyone could confirm that we can see what I am sharing, the resolution. Anyone give me a thumbs up? Carolyn, I see you. Oh, good. All right, thanks. So the resolution, and I'll just read a little bit of it. So right here. So whereas several states across the US have enacted laws that void or repeal or have the effect of voiding or repealing existing state or local protections against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. And whereas several states across the US have enacted laws that authorize or require discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, as well as against same-sex couples and their families. And whereas several states across the US have enacted laws creating exemptions to existing anti-discrimination laws, weakening these protections, and permitting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, as well as against same-sex couples and their families. And whereas the New York legislature continues taking steps towards protecting the rights and lives of LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters across the country by introducing this legislation, suspending all unnecessary travel to states that have enacted these unjust, inhumane laws. And whereas the purpose of UUP shall be to improve the terms and conditions of employment of those it represents, to promote mutual assistance and cooperation among the members of this organization, to advance education and democracy and democracy in education, to promote the principle of unity and collective bargaining in higher education, and very critically, to defend the civil, professional, and human rights of those it represents. Be it resolved that the GSI committee calls upon UUP Delegate Assembly to express their support in the legislation, and that the Executive Committee of UUP will direct our President, Fred Kowal, to send a letter expressing the support of the Senate of the legislation and send that support letter to the leaders of the Senate, the Assembly, and to the governor. And then we had voting at the committee. So that's the resolution that we proposed. And just to give you a sense of the language of the resolution did not come from me at all. The first three whereases actually come from the legislation. Actually, the first four whereases come directly from the legislation itself. And the fifth whereas comes from our Constitution, UUP's Constitution. So the language here presented is not my language. It came from the legislation. It came from our Constitution, and is very straightforward to the point, I think, which is why I felt it was appropriate to keep that language. So at the e-board, the motion passed unanimously, and I am very proud to say that the resolution passed also unanimously at the delegate assembly. And I believe that it passed unanimously at both the executive board and the delegate assembly because it is focusing on what we as a union do well, which is member engagement and advocacy for social justice. So if we pass resolutions, more resolutions in the future that focus on our strengths, I think that will, I think those resolutions will be most successful in passage and implementation. So if there is any question right now about the resolution, I think there was one question that I saw about that, but I think it was more of a, we need better understand what constitutes essential travel. That is true, and I'm sure in the implementation, should the legislation be passed, that the implementation aspect of that would be, well, there would need to be an inclusion of a more defined definition of what that means. So, and I see that Phil Stevens has raised a hand, so go ahead, Phil.
Yes, just for proper grammar, the after the final whereas, the period should be a comma.
After Hochul?
After the
No,
final.
above, sorry, it's after this.
After represents.
Represents, yes.
That because whereas introduces a dependent clause, right?
All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I also wanted to talk about sort of the next steps as we are looking into the future with regards to where we are. Now, I know Chris is going to give a little update of where the legislation is right now in the Assembly and the Senate, but we all know right now that the legislature is out of session. So whatever next steps we are going to be considering really need to be targeting the next legislative session. So this gives us an opportunity really to have a more engaged process into planning what our next steps really could look like. So one of the things that I had considered and we'll be talking about, we can talk about that later and flesh it out in more detail, would be to have a letter writing campaign, for example, to for, you know, how on our website, on our right side, we have our take action section. We could plan to have a letter writing campaign for specifically this piece of legislation that would then be sent to all the individuals. So if I were to fill it out, it'll be sent to my legislators in the Assembly and in the Senate. So I also want to invite, before I pass it on to the next speaker, and then I'll be coming back a little bit later if we have a chance, but I also would like to focus everyone's attention on a great way for us all to become more involved in really any interest that we may have. But because you all are here in this particular panel discussion, I am specifically inviting everyone here to consider joining the Gender and Sexuality Interest Committee. We meet monthly. We have virtual meetings and traditionally we have met on the second Wednesday at 6 p.m., but moving forward into the month of July, we're going to be moving it to, and let me go back to my notes real quick before I don't. So we're going to be moving it to the second Thursday of the month at 4 p.m. So that means that our next committee meeting will be July 13th at 4 p.m. And at that meeting, we'll start reporting. I can report out, for example, as to the next steps that we've gotten from the DEI CBT group that Carolyn was mentioning, that I have been attending as well. And then we can really focus more on the areas of intersectionality with regards to various protected classes, because I think if we can manage to focus in ways that sort of bring us down to where things are intersectionally appropriate, by helping those people in those overlapping groups, we can help everyone because they represent various groups. So to that end, if there are no more questions for me at this moment, so if someone is unable to join the committee meeting at that particular time, I am always open to adjusting the schedule of the committee meetings in the future. So there's your answer for that. All right. So then I will pass it on to Chris, I believe.